Hello and a warm welcome to our special coverage of Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Olumide Macaulay in Lagos, southwest Nigeria. The headlines. Missiles downed, fires break out in Kiev, and Russian attack as one kill in Odessa missile confrontation. Black Sea grain deal extended for 60 days, just 1 day ahead of Russia quitting pact. Plus, British Defence Minister Ben Wallace says UK ready to enable supply of jets to Ukraine. Much obliged for your joining us this morning. Ukraine's capital Kiev has been attacked again from the air by Russia for the 9th time this month. Explosions were heard in Kiev and other Ukrainian regions in the early hours of today, as authorities reported a nationwide air attack. At least one person was killed and 2 others wounded after a Russian missile strike in the southern Ukrainian port city of Odessa. Blasts were also heard in central regions of Vinnytsia, including Zhytomyr. Now, Kiev's military administration says preliminary information indicated all incoming missiles had been destroyed. Mykolaiv Mayor Alexander Senikievich says that Russian forces hit Ukraine's southern city of Mykolaiv with another missile strike. He said in a Telegram message app that car dealer offices, shopping malls, several residential high-rise buildings, and 1 industrial object were also hit. A video released by Ukraine's emergency services shows firefighters working on site of damaged buildings. Meanwhile, Mykolaiv residents woke up to the sound of explosions and were shaken as Russian missiles struck the southern Ukrainian city. Russia denies deliberately targeting civilians in its full-scale invasion that has killed thousands of people, uprooted millions, and destroyed towns. Mykolaiv, a shipbuilding center and a port as well, had a population of about 470,000 people before the war. The city has suffered heavy Russian bombardments throughout the conflict. Meanwhile, Russia confirmed that the deal to allow Ukraine to export its grain safely across the Black Sea, in spite of Russia's military campaign in Ukraine, has been extended by 2 months. The Foreign Ministry spokeswoman, Maria Zakharova, says the deal had been extended to help countries in need, but added that Russia's overall assessment of the situation regarding the deal had not changed. Russia threatened to quit the arrangement agreed last July with the help of the United Nations and Turkey today unless a list of conditions were met. However, Russia's UN envoy also stressed that the deal was extended because Russia has not lost hope that its problems linked to the deal will not be sorted out. The president of Turkey, Tayyip Erdogan, says the Black Sea grain deal has been saved from the brink of collapse for now, and with it hope to help head off a mounting global food crisis. Mr. Erdogan says made the announcement in a speech to his political party just a day before Russia could have quit the deal over obstacles to its own grain and fertilizer exports. The president said, thanks to efforts of Turkey and the support of its Russian and Ukrainian friends, the Black Sea deal had been extended by 2 months. Staying with the Black Sea grain deal extension, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has welcomed it, allowing the safe Black Sea export of Ukraine grain for another 60 days. The Ukrainian government also welcomed the extension, but says Russia must stop using food as weapon and blackmail.
We have some positive and significant developments. The confirmation by the Russian Federation to continue its participation in the Black Sea Initiative for another 60 days. I welcome this decision. the continuation is good news for the world. Outstanding issues remain, but representatives of Russia, Ukraine, Turkey and the United Nations will keep discussing them. I hope we will reach a comprehensive agreement to improve, expand and extend the initiative, as I proposed in a recent letter to the presidents of the three countries. And I want to convey my appreciation to all those taking part in the negotiations in a spirit of constructive engagement. I once again express my gratitude to President Erdogan and the government of Turkey for their efforts working in permanent coordination with the United Nations. The importance of the Black Sea Initiative and the parallel memorandum of understanding between the UN and the Russian Federation is clear. These agreements matter for global food security. Ukrainian and Russian products feed the world. Under the Black Sea Initiative, more than 10 million tons of food have been exported. Vital food supplies are reaching some of the world's most vulnerable people and places, including 30,000 tons of wheat that just left Ukraine aboard a WFP chartered ship to feed hungry people in Sudan. They matter because we are still in the throes of a record-breaking cost of living crisis. Over the last year, markets have stabilized, volatility has been reduced, and we have seen global food prices fall by 20%. And they matter because they demonstrate that even in the darkest hours, there is always a beacon of hope and an opportunity to find solutions that benefit everyone. Looking ahead, we hope that exports of food and fertilizers, including ammonia, from the Russian Federation and Ukraine will be able to reach global supply chains safely and predictably, as foreseen in both the Black Sea Initiative and the Memorandum of Understanding on Russian food and fertilizer exports, the implementation of which the United Nations is fully committed to support.
Meanwhile, the White House in the United States has also hailed the 2-month extension of the pact allowing Ukraine grain exports, but says the world needs more certainty from Russia about the crucial food supply chain. U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said it's a good thing that it has been extended. He adds that Russia continues even a moment of extension to rhetorically hold its hostage in various ways to suggest its days are numbered. British Defence Minister Ben Wallace says Britain can support Ukraine's military by enabling other countries which wish to supply fighter jets and other military equipment to Ukraine to do so, but countered any impression it was actively working to provide fighter planes. German Defence Minister Boris Pistorius also reiterated after the meeting with Wallace that the armed forces of the Federal Republic of Germany would not cede any fighter jets to Ukraine. A spokesperson for the Federal Ministry of Defense had previously reacted positively to reports of a Dutch-British push to form a fighter jet coalition for Ukraine. Both Germany and Britain say they will not support Ukraine joining NATO at the moment, but could see it happening at a later date.
I think that is the key, that Britain and Germany send the message to Russia that what they are doing is unacceptable and that they cannot win in this war, and that they should seek alternatives to it and indeed leave Ukraine. And I think that is very, very important. Well, first of all, Britain isn't going to donate any fighter jets to Ukraine at this time. Typhoon is, we've been consistent in saying we're not going to deliver Typhoon Tranche 1. Is not a plane that would be suitable, but also we make the clear point that this is not about gifting weapon systems. This is gifting a platform. So look, first of all, what could we contribute anyhow? We don't have F16 and we're not going to put Typhoon. What we can obviously contribute is training and support, again within limits because we don't have F16 pilots, but we can help with the pipeline. We can do what we've done throughout this, and Germany has been doing this with us in the International Donor Coordination Cell in Ramstein, which is we can enable other people who wish to. So if Boris is right, this is up to the White House to decide whether it wants to release that technology. But any nation comes to us and says we want to get tanks into Ukraine, we want to get as we have been involved in MiG-29 parts, or Su-24 parts, we will help with that process. We coordinate the political issue of whether Ukraine goes headlong straight into NATO is an issue that has to be decided by 31 nations. Now it was 30, it will be hopefully 32 soon. And I think it's really important that I don't speak on behalf of that alliance. I speak only on behalf of the United Kingdom. We've always said there should be a roadmap towards it. Ukraine were following that roadmap. But I think the here and now is how we can keep them in the momentum to defend their country and then build their resilience. And then let's have that discussion about membership at a future date.
Now let's talk to Barrister Emeka as a former lecturer on diplomatic and consular relations law, Nasarawa State University, Keffi, who joins us in our Abuja studios. Good morning. It's good to see you again, Barrister Eze.
Good morning.
The horrors of war can only be best imagined by those who have not been a part of it or suffered from it. We can only look as far back in Nigeria as a civil war to hear stories from those who are old enough to tell it that it's not something that they want to ever happen again. The sirens over Ukraine with the latest attacks from Russia must have struck that sort of sentiment in the hearts of those that heard it for the 9th time this month as the air raids continue. Can you begin by telling us your initial feelings that this war has been protracted for this long and what you see in your estimation as the current situation?
Thank you. The war is unfortunate because after the Second World War, the world came together and said never again. Especially that led to the signing of the UN Charter in the United States of America in 1945. So it was the view of the world that there should not be this level of warfare, although we have had something in the former Yugoslavia close to this, but it wasn't so encompassing as this one is. That one did not involve the whole world taking their stand, supplying weapons before they could finish the war. So, but as it is now, the Russia-Ukraine war has mopped up the interests of the whole world. So any country pretending not to be part of it, one way or the other, will be deceiving itself, because if it is not for food arising from the United Nations Food Program that has led to the signing and extension of the grain deal for 2 months, with the intervention of President Erdogan of Turkey and the United Nations, if you are not interested in the food, you'll be interested in the judgment of the Western world and Russia, because the way you will have your interests protected at the United Nations will be dependent on the side you took. Now, currently, you are aware that South Africa is being accused of having supplied Russia with weapons. The United States ambassador in South Africa had stated clearly that that was the situation, even though the South African president has denied it. But a lot is going on, and they have recounted that in the press statements of the ANC, they had not taken cognizance of their relationship with the US, but they were much more interested in lampooning America and the West. So I've just taken South Africa as an instance. Now look at the other side, the humanitarian side. More than 8 million Ukrainians are outside their country as refugees, and many more in the country are living in fear. So it is a situation that is worrisome. Besides, no negotiation is seriously going on. The visit of Zelensky to the Vatican is not assurance that there will be peace in the next few months. Preparations are already being made for the war to last for as much as 2-3 years, with the intention to supply airplanes like F16, F35. You are aware that Ukrainian pilots have not been trained to manage these planes, and it is not Americans that will fly for them. It will take a reasonable time for them to learn how to use the F-16, the Typhoons, and some other planes. So currently, there are training schools in some Western countries and US to train the pilots. This is not something that will take a month or two. So the war will go for the long haul. And it's unfortunate. That means countries should continue to prepare their minds that the crisis will take a reasonable time before it will end. And the bombardment of Kiev and other parts of Ukraine, like Bakhmut, the atrocious war in Bakhmut, the Zaporizhia, Kharkiv, and Mykolaiv, and other parts of Ukraine, it is evident that the war is taking a terrible turn. And at the end of the day, the countries, not only Russia and Ukraine, will suffer. Many other countries will suffer. You are aware that Poland has renamed Kaliningrad, and Russia is spewing, a lot of vibes that Poland is about rewriting history. So not just Russia and Ukraine, Poland is affected, and who knows in due course whether Russia will be so angry as to bomb Poland and Poland will be drawn into that war. And if that happens, that means NATO will be playing a role in the war and putting boots on the ground, and that with that kind of escalation, which is what they have been avoiding for a very long time, we may definitely dovetail into something the whole world will not be wanting at this time, especially after having said never again after the Second World War.
Yes, and we hope that that doesn't happen. Now, prior to this day, countries so concerned to mediate have failed, or their mediation has been stalled, or their positions have changed. Take Turkey, take Israel, take France, who are now supporting weapons to be shipped to Ukraine. Take Brazil, who are still trying to bring both parties to the negotiating table. But how far along will they be able to succeed in doing that? Also, to bring to light the African Peace Mission, which is being proposed and, I guess, spearheaded by South Africa's Cyril Ramaphosa. Do you think this will be something that will work in any way, shape, or form to bringing both sides to the table? Do you think African leaders and African nations have that much pull with the Russians and Ukrainians?
No, I think African nations will not succeed because South Africa that is championing it as, even though it claims to be neutral, but from all its actions, South Africa is supporting Russia. So definitely there is no way that will be allowed, and with the investment the United States of America has made in the war, it will not allow South Africa to be an arbiter, so definitely, or a mediator. So definitely that of African mission will not succeed. As for Brazil, considering that the current president is pro-Russia, President Lula, and from the vibes coming out from that country, it is pro-Russia. So I don't think Brazil can be a good mediator. The Vatican can do it better.
Yeah. Let me jump in now, Barrister.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. I also wanted to interrupt you for a second. What about Nigeria? Are you pleased with Nigeria's position concerning this invasion? Some school of thought has propounded that why isn't Nigeria, for instance, even taking advantage of the oil situation to try and produce more oil and put itself in a position where it can sort of maybe not profiteer out of the war, but put itself in a position where it's being proactive in certain things?
Nigeria is a member of OPEC, and it has a quota to produce. So it's bound by the OPEC agreement. So Nigeria cannot get out of its way to produce more than it has committed itself in OPEC. So taking advantage is subjective, because except if Nigeria is producing less than its quota, it can only take advantage to produce up to its quota. So as for OPEC, OPEC members have to abide by their commitments in the OPEC agreement. So if Nigeria wants to produce more, it has to go back to OPEC and make a request to that effect. And I doubt whether Nigeria will be in a position to get the type of quota it will be asking for. But Nigeria, I don't think, has made that move. Nigeria may decide to make that move if it deems it necessary, but it has to enter into consultations and be sure that it will work before it will even make the proposal. So I think what we need now is to ensure that we produce our OPEC quota and manage the income properly within the country. So
Speaking of Nigeria, Barrister, do you think, now
Yes.
that we're in the twilight of the Buhari administration, and the foreign policy concerning Russia has been stated, but we know that in just a few number of days, a new administration will be coming in to take over the reins of power. What's your impression of how Nigeria has handled this? We have Russia. We have a pretty good relationship with Russia, as far as I can imagine. But what is your position on how Nigeria has handled it, and what do you think the position of the incoming administration will be from May 29th?
Nigeria has handled it well, because remember that Nigeria was one of the 77 non-aligned nations, and Nigeria's interest has not been directly affected as to take definite and definitive position against one of these countries. So Nigeria should ordinarily be non-aligned concerning this war. The war is not being fought on its borders. Nigeria is not a member of BRICS. Nigeria is not in Europe, so Nigeria is indirectly affected. So, and remember, there was the United Nations General Assembly resolution against this war, and Nigeria voted in line with the majority. So Nigeria has handled its foreign affairs well concerning this matter. It should not enter into the center, because it takes much more than what we think to actually enter into the center of it. Because if Nigeria enters into the center, for what purpose? South Africa is a member of BRICS. I recently hosted military maneuvers involving Russia. So Nigeria has not done that. Nigeria is not a member of BRICS. So even with the incoming administration, I don't think the foreign policy of Nigeria will change, because we ought to stand where we are now and watch events unfold. We have not gotten to that zenith as to come out plainly to say, oh, we are completely for Ukraine or we are completely for Russia. We have diplomatic relations with those countries, and we just have to continue to manage it and make appeal that the war should cease, because if it continues, it will get to a head where every country will be compelled to take a side.
The supply of weapons is key in Ukraine's defense, and this seems to have been ramped up a notch by the number of nations who have been supplying these weapons. But as you mentioned, in the F16 fighter jets proposal coalition, which has been propounded or put forward by Mark Rutte and Rishi Sunak, both nations, not acceptable to Germany, do you think that if it does happen, it'll bring a more grievous dimension to the war? And I'd also like you to talk about the training involved in not just in using these sophisticated military hardware, including the fighter jets, for aerial combat. I had mentioned before, yesterday as a matter of fact, that training alone and operational accidents alone accounted for a great number of losses of planes by, for instance, Germany during World War II. Now, if these fighter F-16s are given to Ukraine, it's really a tall order, is it, for them to be operational and running and have the same kind of expertise that the combat pilots of, say, the United States will have?
I think with proper training, Ukrainian pilots can handle them. But the matter goes beyond handling those planes. If you look at the F-35, for example, though that is not immediately on the table, the United States has been very, very careful in giving it out to other countries, even in time of peace, because of the US technology in that plane. And they are careful that it should not fall into the wrong hands, especially those who are not their friends, so that they don't go and copy it. So the technology in some of these planes, and you know some of these planes might be captured by Russia or destroyed by Russia, and they can take the technology and replicate them. So the expertise in flying the planes is one factor. The technology in the planes that may fall into the wrong hands is another factor. But Germany has this experience during the Second World War, and it is being cautious in the actions it will take, although it is being, talked to by its Western allies. But the UK, Britain has supplied Storm Shadows, or about supplying Storm Shadows to Ukraine with a condition that it must be used within Ukrainian territory, even if it is in the hands of Russia, like Luhansk, Donbass, Crimea, and two other regions. So then some other countries are also considering supplying like the F-16, but basically one thing is sure, that they are being careful. You can see it had not been on the table since the war started that this planes should be supplied, the fighters should be supplied. But now the war had gotten to a point that if not supplied, Russia may overrun Ukraine. And look at the Patriot missile that has been supplied. It has been damaged by Russia, although it succeeded in restraining or destroying 18 missiles, including the 6 Kinzhal supersonic missiles that was used recently, within the past 1 week, to attack Kiev, specifically Kiev. And the rain of missiles have continued. And so, for instance, before you can repair the Patriot missiles, it is not Ukraine that will repair it. You need to fly in people from US, and a lot of money will go into it. That Patriot missile, for one of them is costs $1.1 billion. So with the damage to it, you know what that means. You supply 2 or 3, you know what that will mean. But the Avenger missiles, the Avenger air defense supplied also, can do some of these things, but not up to the Patriot missiles. So the supply of fighters and such like definitely will be a game changer, because at the beginning, Ukraine didn't have, the capacity to go beyond 20 miles in terms of its air defense, and Russia was very close to places that could attack, but now if these fighters are supplied, it will mean that Russia will move some of its weapons far into Crimea and perhaps Donbass. And at the end of the day, definitely, it is to make the 5th fleet, naval fleet of Russia, to be vulnerable. And once it becomes vulnerable, Russia will be in a position to talk peace. As for now, Russia does not feel it is vulnerable, and that's why when you call them to the peace table, they give their own conditions that the regions they have taken over and made a law to be theirs, they must be allowed to hold on to them. So the war must get to another stage if Ukraine intends to enjoy its sovereignty as it was before 2014 invasion of Crimea.
Yeah, excuse me. But, you know, that's why they say make war, not peace. So weapons, systems, casualties, and the 448th day, I imagine, that this war has gone on for too long. Thank you so much, Barrister Emeka Eze, for being on the program this morning.
Thank you for inviting me.
Welcome back to our special coverage of Russian invasion of Ukraine. Now, a resolution recognizing as genocide starvation of millions of Ukrainians between 1932 and 1933, a result of Soviet policies, has been approved by the French Senate. The proposal, discussed in the presence of Ukrainian Ambassador Vladimir Omelchenko, received 327 favorable votes and only 16 against. Now, the endorsed text said, the Great Famine, known as the Holodomor in Ukrainian, consisted in the starvation, deportation, and methodically organized extermination of the Ukrainian people, adding that the event therefore amounted to genocide. Ukraine's Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba told the top Chinese envoy at talks in Kiev that Kiev will not accept any proposals to end the war with Russia that involved it losing territory or freezing the conflict. The Ukrainian Foreign Ministry said in a statement that China's Special Representative for Eurasian Affairs and former ambassador to Russia visited Ukraine on Tuesday and Wednesday. The visit is the first to Kiev by a senior envoy from China, which has burgeoning ties with Russia since Moscow's full-scale invasion in February 2022. The senior Chinese official's trip to Europe is expected also to include talks in Russia, Poland, France, and Germany. China has refrained from condemning Moscow or referring to its actions as an invasion, leading to criticism from European countries and the United States, which have questioned China's credibility as a potential broker in the conflict. British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has arrived in Tokyo with his wife, Akshata Murthy, en route to Hiroshima for the G7 summit. Now, according to a statement from the UK government, Sunak is set to sign a historic Hiroshima Accord later today when he meets with Japan's Prime Minister Fumio Kishida ahead of the G7 to step up defense cooperation with Japan. As part of the accord, the countries will also announce the launch of a semiconductor partnership to strengthen chip supply chain in an increasingly competitive market. At the G7 summit, the Prime Minister will again push for more assistance for Ukraine as it prepares for escalating military action against Russia. U.S. President Joe Biden says there is work to be done on the global stage as he heads to Japan as well to consult with allies on Russia's invasion of Ukraine and China's assertiveness in the Pacific. Support for Ukraine's expected counteroffensive against Russia is set to take center stage at the meeting in Hiroshima alongside economic, climate, and global development issues. Biden and allies have armed Kiev with ever more advanced weaponry and maintained deep sanctions on Russia's economy, though maintaining resolve has grown more challenging in Washington and other global capitals. Belarusian Foreign Minister Sergei Ananek says Belarus, one of Russia's closest allies, has partially restored controls on its border with its neighbor. This is the first time in 28 years that there have been checks at the border. According to him, the introduction of border control aimed to avoid the entry of third country nationals into Belarus in advance of the implementation of an intergovernmental agreement on the mutual recognition of visas. However, human rights activists think the border checks will target Russian men trying to avoid mobilization into the Russian army. Now let's talk to Mr. Oluseyi Adeyemo, Public Affairs Analyst, who joins us from Lagos in southwest Nigeria. It's good to have you with us today.
Thank you, Olumide. I'm so happy to be here.
As are we. And to the G7 summit, which is to hold, and the appearance of these nations, most of whom are against Russia in a hardline fashion, what do you think can be achieved from the summit? For instance, there are those who are, of the financial leaders of the G7, who are thinking of ramping up these sanctions against Russia to help to deter them from further prosecution of this war. Can anything practical come out of this summit?
Olumide, all of us are very optimistic that we'll be able to get a lot out of this summit. But the truth of the matter is Russia has clearly shown itself as a country, as a formidable, strong country that nobody can just walk, all over. Whatever you're doing with them, you must do with caution. Whatever negotiations, whatever sanctions, whatever agreement, you must do with a lot of caution. For instance, the reason why Ukraine, for instance, is having problem with the exportation of its grain is the fact that most of the raw materials, all the equipment that are needed in the production of its grain are gotten from Russia. So truth of the matter is, if you, as a person, what I've seen happen, in this war or invasion or whatever name is called, it is a lot of negotiation, a lot of the fact that as a country, as a people, you must do whatever you can to be strong so that whenever you're engaging or people are engaging with you or they're dealing with you, they are cautious and very conscious of the fact that they can't just walk all over you. So yes, all of these leaders are going in there, with a lot of desire to be able to take, assertive decisions. But we all know that, a lot of them are being affected economically and otherwise by what happens in Russia and what, whatever stand they take, they must also be cautious because they also need to rule their country. They need to cater for their people. They need to be, sure that they are not going to come out at the end of the day hurting themselves and their people with the kind of decision they take. So there's a lot of caution. There's a lot of caution that is in what everybody says and whatever decisions everybody take at the end of the day.
What, therefore, is your position on Russia's current military situation? The narrative being spun in many quarters is that because the war has been protracted and because Russia has suffered a number of losses, many of which are significant, and because of the use of the mercenaries and because of the lack of and the lull in the offensive, infantry-wise, and having to rely on drones and air support, that Russia is having a very bad day of it, and that Ukraine's victory is inevitable. Is this correct in your estimation?
Truth is, all of us are praying that they're having a bad day because we can't wait for this war to be over. It's affecting our economy, it's affecting our lives, very, very negatively. And so we are hoping that the war will end today. In fact, if you ask me, yesterday, so that all of us can go back to our life, because unfortunately, the whole world is being faced with a lot of negative things right now. Economically, we just came out of COVID. There's a lot of things that's being dealt with. We have problems with the world as in global warming, the climate, and a host of things. So if they're really, really, really having a bad day, I think it's good news. But the truth of the matter is the fact that they're still standing and they're still bombing, they're still killing, which is such a sad thing because, as long as this war lasts, whether a day or two, it affects the rest of us, the rest of the world, very negatively. The impact is enormous. It is very negative. And my prayer and hope is that today, I mean, this would, would end, and that they will not have the strength to go on. They would be willing to agree to some truth, because as long as they have the strength to go on for a day more, it is bad for the rest of us. And my hope and prayer is that this will come to an end as soon as possible.
Okay, now, German Leopard tanks, Storm Shadow cruise missiles, the air missile Patriot system defense from the United States. These and others Ukraine has been receiving. Training from Australia, training from the UK, special forces allegedly from the United States, from the UK, helping with the training. All of this put together, and given that it works, and taking for granted that everything goes according to plan, although we know that at the end of the day, it's up to the soldiers and their bravery and the military commanders and their strategy that will win this for Ukraine or for the other party. Do you think that Ukraine will be able to stop this invasion? With the recent deployment, with the recent and the counteroffensive that is being expected, all these things I've just mentioned, which are happening at this moment, and even more support coming from these countries, is it enough to stop Russia?
I think, and this is my honest opinion, that this war is about staying power. So the person who is able to stay and stand the longest is the one that is going to win the war, because, the state of warring, combating globally has changed. You just alluded to it, you just described it. You're talking about drones, so it wasn't, we're not talking about the days where people would have to be deployed and, you'll see human beings, and that can, you can say, okay, the moment you kill so numbers of soldiers, then you are beginning to say to yourself that you've won. Now is a different ball game. People can sit in the comfort of wherever they are, and they can deploy, arsenals that will, delve a lot of, dangerous and very, very negative impact on their opponents. So as long as both parties are able to stay, and this time around we're referring to Ukraine, as long as they're able to, stand their ground, because unfortunately, the way they've sort of deployed their strategy in this war is that they're not expected to go on the offensive. They're supposed to just defend their territory because, those are agreements that they have with those who are supplying them with the weaponry. So they can't afford to just go into the Russia territory and just, go ahead and, bomb them like they would have wanted to. So they're very careful. So it's about the staying power. As long as they're able to stand their ground and be able to sort of wear out the Russians, then we'll be saying to ourselves that we're probably coasting home to some victory and peace that the rest of us are praying and hoping for. So my hope and prayer is that with all of this support, with all of these supplies that they're getting from the rest of the world, they'll be able to stand their ground, they'll be able to stay, so that the Russians will be, the strength they have, or the staying power they have, will wear out, and then we can then have the peace that we all desire. So it's about the staying power, because at the end of the day, like I said, they can't bomb them, they can't destroy them, they can't go into their territory, they can only hold their fort, stand their ground, and be able to say, look, you can't take our territory as you desire. So I'm hoping that all of this supplies and support would result into Ukraine being able to stay as firmly as we all hope they would be able to.
And as that counteroffensive is still being expected. Thank you so much, Mr. Adeyemo Oluseyi Adeyemo, Public Affairs Analyst, who joined us from Lagos.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
When we return, Russia and Belarus reaffirm commitment to nuclear non-proliferation. Please stay with us.
From the predictable to the unpredictable, news is fast-paced. On The World Today, we bring you stories from far and wide, narrating the intricacies of politics, diplomacy, war, and disasters. Join us as we make sense of it all, with in-depth coverage and analysis from across the globe. The World Today, every weekday at 5:30 p.m. From the north to the south, east and west, Network Africa brings you news stories from all around the continent, with wide range in coverage, insights, and analysis of special issues. We dissect Africa in its beauty and peculiarities. Network Africa tells the African story from the African perspective. Network Africa, weekdays at 4 p.m.
Lights, camera, action, and showtime.
This is a big win for my generation of Africans all over the world.
You don't need no other body.
I want you to listen to me well.
The movies in the beginning was the love of man.
Some amazing talent in Nigeria who were born, raised, they never left, they're there.
Watch entertainment news on Channels Television at these times.
Welcome back to our special coverage of Russian invasion of Ukraine. We're turning our attention to the business perspective of the conflict. Our correspondent, John Emeka, is with us in the studio.
Good morning.
Good morning. You know, Russia is famous for having billionaires, high net worth individuals, oligarchs, as they call some of these people. An individual I know who had his super yacht seized in the United States.
And he's still not poor, in spite of it being seized.
Exactly. And we have so many famous billionaires who are allies of Putin, recognized and fingered to be such, and because of that, they are bearing the short end of the stick.
Yes.
Now, what can you tell us about what you were just mentioning to me about
just before,
the sanctions?
So the thing is, you have these guys, and they have real estate properties everywhere around the world. I don't know about Nigeria, though, but we're talking about the UK now,
yes.
And a new research by BBC shows that the UK may be losing about £1 billion of fines from this property, because they do have a new transparency law which is supposed to enforce some of these fines on some of these oligarchs. So properties in the UK, once they declare their owners, they're supposed to pay about £2,500 every day. You know, some of these oligarchs, and
that's a lot of money.
That's a lot of money, especially for the UK, because the UK has its own struggles economically at this time. They have the energy cost, they have the inflation, the cost of living crisis. Juliana, our colleague who is there, talks about it every day, how it's squeezed, the liquidity is squeezed, and cost of living has really surged. So if the UK can get about £1 billion in fines from the oligarchs. We know, as you mentioned, some of them had their yachts and some other properties seized, and still it hasn't made them poor. You know, so why would they not charge this? This is a big question. And funny enough, it's the BBC that carried out the investigation and brought out these amounts. And, you know, the BBC is supposed to be like the mouthpiece of the government there. So why have the government, or has the government not imposed these fines on these oligarchs on their property? Their properties are well known in the country, but they have not gone through the process and the bureaucracy of establishing the owners and, you know, putting up this fine. That's one big question that's unanswered at this time in the UK.
Now, across the board, we know that uranium, for instance, is being expected to be sanctioned, and from by the United States. It's something they use a lot there. Then they import that from Russia. They get that from Russia.
Yes.
So something that they're saying, okay, we're looking at that. The U.S. Senate looking at how they can put more teeth to their more traction to their sanctions.
Yes.
So it's incredible that that is happening as well at this moment.
Yeah, in the UK too. I mean, last year, August, there had been a report that, there was a loophole. I think that's what gave birth to this new transparency law, that there was a loophole in the government laws that the rich guys, the oligarchs, were using to escape, or to keep their fortune in the UK in spite of the sanctions, in spite of, some of the very prominent ones getting sanctioned and getting whipped by the sanctions, the US and all of that. But, I mean, if this is going on, then I guess maybe by now, since...
Not a very popular time, a good time to be a friend of President Putin. It's important that we should mention that these oligarchs are the ones that are identified to be sympathetic to the Russian cause.
To the Russian...
But speaking of the Russian cause, yesterday you were talking about the Black Sea...
The grain deal,
yeah. And we're saying that hopefully they're going to change their minds.
I mean,
so
that was so last minute.
Extension, will it be enough to do a lot?
Well, it is something. I mean, it is something if the world waits for Ukraine. About 40% of the grain that is being consumed around the world, both for humanitarian causes and for individual consumptions in different countries, including Africa, Ethiopia, and all of that, comes from Ukraine, then we might as well use that 2 months, to make the most of it, whatever we get at that time. And I hope it to help, soft pedal some of those prices that could have skyrocketed. And I was surprised, to say the truth, because remember yesterday when we talked about it, we did say that the U.S. is saying that Russia is still exporting its food and fertilizer. So why do they want extra condition? And at the end of the day, I mean, it's the same condition that was attached to the deal before now that is still being attached, at least until July. And we'll see if any of the parties will give way by the 18th of July when this is supposed to expire.
Thank you. Any more business news across the board, including or excluding Ukraine, on Business Morning after this program? Stay tuned for that. Now, we're bringing it home with Russia and Belarus, who've reaffirmed their commitment to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, as according to a report by Russian state news agency TASS. Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty aims to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons and technology. In March, Russian President Vladimir Putin says he intended to station tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus, heightening fears in the West. But Minsk says the Russian nuclear plan will not contravene international non-proliferation agreements, as Belarus itself will not have control over the weapons. And that's where we leave it for today's special coverage of Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Olumide Macaulay. Thank you for watching. Do join us again tomorrow for another edition. Have a great day.